It's strange how quickly pride can turn into someone else's trophy. One minute you're standing behind your work, and the next, someone else is smiling for the cameras. For months, I'd been running a food drive out of the community center in Madison. It started small, just a couple of grocery carts in the lobby, but by winter we'd filled an entire storage room. Local businesses pitched in, neighbors brought canned goods by the bag, and I spent most of my evenings sorting and labeling. It wasn't glamorous, but I believed in what we were building. My aunt, Laura, had shown up halfway through the project. She was family, sure, but we weren't especially close. She worked in real estate and liked being seen at events where people shook hands and smiled for photos. At first, I thought she was just lending a hand. She did make a big show of delivering donations in her SUV, usually with a friend or two tagging along. But I noticed she never stuck around to stock shelves or haul boxes. The first hint of trouble came when I overheard her telling someone at a coffee shop that her food drive was going great. I brushed it off as sloppy wording. Maybe she meant she was helping. But the way the woman responded, praising her for such a big heart, made something sink in my stomach. I didn't say anything then, but I started paying more attention. By early February, we collected enough to make a real difference for dozens of families. I was busy organizing the final distribution when I heard from the local news station. They wanted to feature the drive as a positive community story. My heart jumped. I thought about the volunteers, the donors, the kids who'd helped decorate the collection boxes. This could be a chance to show them all that their effort mattered. What I didn't expect was to find out, the very next day, that my aunt had already RSVP'd for the interview as the organizer. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the reporter had misunderstood who to contact. But when I called the station, the producer cheerfully confirmed Laura was scheduled for an on-camera segment at the center, no less, to talk about her food drive. I felt my chest tighten. I asked how they'd gotten her name. The producer said Laura had reached out directly, explaining the project and offering to set up the visuals for the piece. Apparently, she'd even promised to have her team there to help with staging. I didn't want to overreact, but I also knew how these things work. Once a story runs with someone's name attached, the truth doesn't get much oxygen. And the people who'd actually done the work, especially the kids from the after-school program, would see someone else taking credit. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the piles of donation logs and sign-in sheets I'd kept. My name was on every permit, every thank you letter from the food bank, every receipt from local businesses. I had the proof, but using it felt messy. This was family. I decided to call her directly. She answered in her usual upbeat tone, like she'd been expecting me. I didn't waste time. I told her the news had called me about the interview, and I was confused why she was listed as the organizer. She laughed, light, dismissive. "Oh, don't make it a big deal. I'm just better on camera, you know. You're the heart, I'm the face. It's a win-win." The way she said it made it clear she'd already decided the matter, and in her mind, she was doing me a favor. I hung up without agreeing to anything, but I also didn't tell her I'd be at the interview. Not yet. I needed to think this through. The morning of the interview, I got to the community center early. The volunteers were already bustling around, sorting the last of the boxes for delivery. I told them to keep going as usual, but I could feel my mind running ahead, replaying every conversation I'd had with Laura over the past few months. Little comments I'd brushed off now felt sharper. Her asking for just a few photos with the boxes, her suggesting we brand the drive with her real estate logo for visibility. By the time the news crew pulled into the parking lot, she arrived too, dressed in a bright red coat, hair perfectly done, a stack of business cards in hand. She acted surprised to see me, though the flash in her eyes told me otherwise. The reporter shook her hand first, then turned to me. "And you must be the organizer?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I gestured toward the volunteers, Mrs. Hernandez, who'd logged every can, James from the high school who'd hauled pallets without complaint, the two middle schoolers stacking boxes with more focus than most adults. I told the reporter I could give them the background, but they'd need to talk to the people who made this happen. The crew started filming B-roll, volunteers at work, donors dropping off last-minute items. Laura kept angling to be in every shot, drifting into the frame like she owned the place. When the interview started, she jumped in before the reporter even finished the first question. She talked about her vision, her commitment to the community, and how proud she was to lead this initiative. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, I was counting the seconds until the part one knew was coming, the part she hadn't planned for, because what she didn't know was that the news crew had asked me, the day before, for any background photos or videos of the project from the beginning, and I'd sent them everything. The camera crew wrapped the initial questions with Laura and asked to shoot a few cutaway clips. While they adjusted their equipment, the reporter pulled me aside. She thanked me for sending over all the early footage. It gave them a great sense of how the drive started. As they rolled again, the segment shifted. The reporter explained on camera that the project had begun last fall, under the leadership of local social worker Emily Carter. And then they played a quick montage from my phone videos, me hauling boxes into the empty storage room, kids decorating collection bins, volunteers setting up the first donation table. My voice was in the background of some clips, directing people or laughing with them. Laura's smile didn't falter, but I saw her jaw tighten. She chimed in here and there, but now the questions were coming to me: how the idea started, what challenges we faced, and how the community responded. I gave honest, simple answers, making sure to name the volunteers and donors. The reporter seemed genuinely interested, asking follow-ups that had nothing to do with real estate or branding. By the time they finished, Laura was hanging back, scrolling on her phone. She didn't leave right away, but she also didn't say much. The crew thanked everyone, packed up, and promised to let us know when the segment would air. After they left, a couple of volunteers came over, grinning. They'd noticed the shift too. Mrs. Hernandez patted my arm and said, "Don't worry, honey. People see the truth." I smiled, but I kept my thoughts to myself. The real test would be when that piece went live, and something told me Laura wasn't done trying to steer the narrative. The segment aired 2 days later during the evening news. I'd recorded it, but I didn't have to wait to watch. My phone started lighting up with texts from friends, co-workers, even a couple of old classmates I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone had seen it. The edit was better than I'd hoped. They opened with the early footage I'd sent, then cut to shots of the volunteers in action. My answers carried most of the narration, with Laura appearing briefly, usually in the background. Her only direct quote was a generic comment about how important community support is, which ironically made her look like just another helpful participant. By the time I watched it myself, I realized the reporter had framed the whole thing as a grassroots effort led by Emily Carter and a dedicated group of volunteers. No mention of real estate, no inflated titles, no space for anyone to claim it as a personal brand. The next morning at the center, the energy was different. Donors stopped by to congratulate us, not her. The volunteers were still buzzing, especially the teens, who were thrilled to see themselves on TV. I kept the focus on the work. We still had deliveries to make and shelves to clear, but inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Laura showed up halfway through the day. She didn't say much, just walked in, glanced around, and dropped off a couple of bags of groceries. When I thanked her, she smiled in that tight way people do when they're holding something back. As she left, she said, "Well, at least it got good exposure." Then she walked out before I could answer. That was when I realized something important. She hadn't been embarrassed, she'd been outmaneuvered. And people like that don't just let it go. I didn't have to wait long to see her next move. 2 days later, a glossy post appeared on her real estate Facebook page, a collage of photos from the food drive, mostly ones where she was front and center. The caption read, "So proud to support this amazing community effort." It wasn't outright claiming credit, but the wording was careful. If you didn't know better, you'd think she'd been the one running the show. I let it slide at first. The drive was over, the shelves were empty, and the deliveries had been made. The families who needed the food had it, and that was what mattered. But the calls started trickling in. 2 local businesses wanted to partner, with her for next year's event. They'd seen the post and assumed she was organizing another one. That was the line for me. I called both businesses back, politely thanking them for their interest and explaining that the drive had been run through the community center, not by any private company. They were surprised, but both said they appreciated the clarification. Word must have gotten back to Laura, because that evening I got a text. "Hey, just a heads up, I've been talking to a few folks about next year. Thought we could make it bigger, bring in some corporate sponsors. Let's meet to discuss." I stared at my phone for a long moment before replying. I told her I appreciated her wanting to help, but if the drive happened again, it would stay community-led. No logos, no branding, no private ownership. Her response was instant. "That's short-sighted, Am. You're thinking too small." I didn't answer. I knew this wasn't the end of it. People like Laura didn't disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. They just changed their strategy. And I could already feel her working on the next one. By March, the food drive had faded from the news cycle, but Laura's networking hadn't slowed down. I started hearing her name pop up in conversations at the community center, usually from people who didn't know the backstory. She'd apparently been telling folks she was partnering with me on future projects, even though we hadn't spoken since that last text exchange. One afternoon, the center's director, Marlene, called me into her office. She shut the door, leaned back in her chair, and said, "I got a call from the Chamber of Commerce. They want us to co-host an award luncheon for local community leaders. Guess whose name was on the list alongside yours?" I didn't have to guess. Marlene sighed. "I don't want drama, but I also don't like anyone misrepresenting themselves. You built the drive from the ground up. If she wants to help, fine, but this?" She gestured vaguely, meaning all of it. "This isn't help." I told her I agreed. The question was how to handle it without making the whole thing a public feud. Madison wasn't a big city. People remembered gossip more than facts. Marlene suggested something simple. The luncheon would include a short presentation on each honoree's work, with photos and a summary written by the organizers. "We'll submit yours," she said, "and make it clear where the credit belongs. No confrontation, just facts." It was subtle, maybe even too subtle for someone like Laura to pick up on right away, but I liked it. Facts don't need to shout, they just need to be seen. As I left her office, I couldn't shake the feeling that this luncheon was going to be the stage for whatever Laura had been planning all along. The luncheon was held in a downtown hotel ballroom, the kind with too much carpet and overly polished silverware. I arrived early with Marlene, carrying a folder of photos from the drive and a short write-up that named every volunteer group involved. We handed it to the event coordinator, who promised to display it alongside my name during the presentation. Laura showed up 20 minutes later, wearing a cobalt dress that turned heads. She made her way around the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing loudly, sliding into conversations like she'd always been there. I noticed she had her own stack of printed cards, each one featuring her headshot and the words, "Community Advocate," under her real estate logo. During the mingling, a couple of people came up to me, saying they were so glad Laura and I were doing these projects together. I just smiled and said, "It's a community effort," then shifted the conversation back to the center. When the presentations began, Laura's name was called first. The MC read from a short bio she provided, full of vague references to spearheading initiatives and mobilizing resources. She beamed as she accepted her plaque, posing for a photo that would no doubt make her next Facebook post. Then it was my turn. The screen behind the podium lit up with photos from the first day of the drive to the final delivery. Kids decorating boxes, Mrs. Hernandez with her clipboard, me unloading donations from a pickup truck in snow boots. The write-up Marlene had submitted scrolled beside the images, making it unmistakably clear who had organized the effort and how it had grown. When I stepped off the stage, Laura's smile was still there, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. I had a feeling she'd just realized this room might not be as easy to win over as she thought. After the luncheon, the crowd broke into small groups around the dessert tables. I was mid-conversation with a city council member when Laura walked up, her tone as bright as ever. Great job up there, Em, she said, placing a hand on my arm. We really made an impact this year. I caught the subtle shift, and decided not to let it pass. I smiled politely and said, yes, the center and our volunteers really did something special. Then I turned back to my conversation. It wasn't rude, but it left no space for her to slide in and claim more than she had. A few minutes later, Marlene joined me by the coffee station. You handled that well, she murmured. I just shrugged. I'd realized by then that Laura's approach wasn't about outright lies. It was about constant, gentle rewriting of the story until everyone forgot the original version. If you didn't counter it every time, it stuck. By the end of the event, several attendees had asked for my card or stopped me to talk about other volunteer opportunities. That was the moment I knew the truth had landed in the right places. The people who mattered had seen the full picture. Laura left without saying goodbye, slipping out while I was still talking to a local reporter about another community initiative. I noticed she didn't take any of the event programs with her, the ones that had the photo of me and the volunteers printed next to the food drive description. As I packed up my things, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. She could post all she wanted online. In rooms like this, where decisions were made and connections formed, the facts had already spoken. A week later, the chamber posted photos from the luncheon on their website. The gallery showed every honoree, but the one from my segment stood out, me at the podium, the volunteers' faces filling the screen behind me. The caption read, Emily Carter, Community Center Social Worker, recognized for organizing the Madison Winter Food Drive. There was no mention of Laura anywhere on the page. I didn't share it right away. Instead, I forwarded the link to the volunteers and donors first. Their replies trickled in throughout the day, short notes, heart emojis, a couple of proud of you messages that meant more than any public recognition could. Laura never brought the food drive up again. She stayed busy with her real estate work, still showing up at community events, but I noticed she never volunteered at the center after that. Maybe she decided the environment wasn't as easy to control as she thought. As for me, I went back to my routine, client meetings, after-school programs, planning the next project with Marlene. The food drive had been exhausting, but it also reminded me why I do this work. The recognition was nice, sure, but it was secondary to the fact that shelves had been filled and families had been fed. Still, when I walked past the community center's bulletin board and saw the clipping from the local paper about the drive, my name under the headline, it gave me a quiet sense of closure, not because I'd won anything over Laura, but because the truth had been recorded. In a small town, stories get retold, but this one, at least, was written down in black and white.